Ben, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, it is good to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
So there's a lot of ground to cover here, brother. And I was thinking about this interview and I was like, where the fuck do I begin with this? There's so much stuff I want to get through. And earlier we were talking, you said, hey man, if we have to go over a little bit, that's great. I was like, yeah, that's a good chance we're gonna do that. Um, I want to start with a question. I don't know if I've ever asked a guest before, and that is what does the Crawford name mean to you?
Wow, that is a crazy question. I'll answer it in two ways. One, it means something really incredible to me. Um, I've put a lot of energy into investing in that area of my life, also known as my family. That's my last name, I guess, for people that don't know. But then in another way, I guess I would say it also means less than it ever has to me now, because just like I guess there's in my younger days, I was all about building out my brand and my organization and my team. And it was all like this ego driven bullshit, which I think has its place and is valuable and important. But the older I've gotten, the less I care what brand it has and how much it benefits me personally or my specific organization or team. So it's kind of fuck, that's a way to start off deep. But I mean, like, but I don't want to overlook, I guess, the first part of my life. One of the things that differentiated our life early on, and I see you doing this, is that we started to invest a small percentage of the amount of energy that others were investing into their workplace and in their business into our homes
Yeah.
and into our families, which even it doesn't take much to stand out in that area, because everyone is so used to giving like 80% of their energy to work, 20% to school, and then an extra 5 or 10% to clubs or churches or whatever the hell organization, soccer, which is great. Those are nice places. But we started asking this question, like, what if we invested 10, 25% of that energy into designing the home life and the relationships in the family that we were excited to be around? And we saw huge shifts happen. So I guess that's the one
Yeah.
answer.
And for me, that's why I was, when I learned about your story, I was like, oh, hell yeah. And we got to talk, because that to me is where it's at. Is that shift of priority, that shift of energy. I was talking with my buddy Jeff Woods, who runs the company The One Thing with Jay Papasan and Gary Keller, and based on that popular book, The One Thing. And yeah, we were having this conversation about it really just comes down to prioritizing, like, what do you care about? Like, where are you going to put your energy and your time, and where will you use your entrepreneurial spirit?
Yeah. And that's where, like, I mean, I don't know, you can bust your ass and make, get what, 5% higher return at work, I think,
Right,
or something like that.
right,
But if you take like a small shift and you take going from 0 to 5% energy. I mean, my wife and I, we noticed this when we even just started scheduling a weekly meeting. That was
right.
very similar to, I mean, everyone has meetings, right? At work, you have like literally 20 meetings a week where you do simple shit. You're like, hey, where are things at? Where do we want to go? How are we going to get there? It's
Yeah,
like basic stuff, but people don't do that at home. People put home on autopilot. So even just by increasing 5% energy at home, we noticed like these massive differences.
yeah.
So I think it's a great place to invest.
I couldn't get anybody to show up to my meetings, but when I started calling them circles, like morning circle or whatever, I got more attendance. That's with my wife, the
Yeah, you
buy-in.
got to get donuts
She doesn't want to come to a meeting with me.
and sugar. Like
Right.
we do it at restaurants. Otherwise, we wouldn't show up either.
Yeah, that's fun. Did you have good role models growing up? Like, where did all this begin for you? This intention on family and this adventure and the creativity. I saw a picture on your Instagram, I think, of like you commenting about you wouldn't have such an epic beard if it weren't for this guy. I'm guessing, was that your dad?
Oh, yeah, he did have a pretty hefty beard and did lead
Anyway,
the
just got me
way
thinking
in
about your
that way.
childhood. Tell me about, like, what was that like for you and your upbringing, and where were the warnings and examples?
You know, I think the biggest examples I had from my childhood. Well, my dad is from a small town in Washington, Yakima, Washington. It's like where most of the apples in the country come from. and he always wanted to get out, but he married my mom, obviously, who was Korean. And in that small town, like, you didn't have white guys marrying Asian women. Like, that didn't happen. So I actually think that the biggest role model example they had was not necessarily in how to live life in any one particular way, but in how to give the middle finger to popular opinion and how to do what you believe in
Yeah.
and think outside the box in that way, I guess.
Yeah. Where do you think the world is going off the rails right now?
Do I do I think it
Where
is,
do
or
you
where?
think? Yeah, like where, if you do want to take a stand against something right now, where are you investing time and energy to, and maybe not even standing against something, but you do when you stand for something in your family. What is that for you guys?
I think the thing from our background, okay, so we come from a really strong faith background where faith was everything. And I'm not against it, but I am against certain patterns that I've observed in that, which I actually see very upfront with a lot of the COVID issues now. And I don't want to make that the issue because I don't have an opinion on the masks or the vaccines. I don't really care. But in terms of the mindsets behind it, I feel like people are so they quickly gravitate towards these black or white opinions that give them peace of mind, and they kind of absolve personal or familial responsibility.
Yeah.
So, you can just like check off boxes easy, and you can like hop on the latest bandwagon that all your buddies on Facebook are doing, and you feel good about yourself, but it's just another bandwagon. So that's the like whatever bandwagon it is, I don't care what it is, what brand it is, whether it's faith or science or political. I
Right.
feel like to be able to step back a little bit from that energy that'll just always sweep you, it'll consume you all and it'll leave you an empty shell when you're done. To be able to step back and say, what do I actually care about?
Yeah.
Like, what's going to satisfy me in 1 or 2 decades? That's probably the stuff I'm the most passionate about.
Yeah.
So we put a lot of energy, I guess, into kind of educating our kids how to identify bandwagons, how to make decisions themselves if they want to be a part of it, how to think for themselves. And
Yeah. How's your ability to be decisive and to know yourself? How is that evolving over the last year as a grown man with a family? What's that like?
man, well, I mean, writing the book was a huge step in that process of just, it's weird. Like something about putting words to paper. I know because you've done this. Like when you put words to paper, it's kind of this like time capsule that it's different from Instagram stories or all these instant things that kind of like disappear. At least it feels different. So you really have to decide, am I going to include all these disclaimers and say things soft and walk in the gray? Or am I actually going to take a stand for something? Am I going to be decisive and say the thing that I might regret, but also I hella believe in right now?
Yeah.
And that's been helpful for me just as a man and as a human to be like, I'm okay with being wrong, but I'm at least going to say what I believe right now. And I'm not going to be afraid of influence, whether it's even like I said, I can apologize in the future. I'm okay with that. But that's not going to keep me silent. And I think in the past I was like, oh, that really scared me, that idea of taking a stand or being wrong.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm growing this year.
And you think that's driven by ego? Like, I mean, is that just us as young men wrestling with ego? This like what I say today is going to matter so much in the future.
I actually think it is. For me, it was a lot of it. I mean, there's different ego has so many different packages. You hear
Right.
about like perfectionism. I think that's driven by ego, even though it sounds all noble and nice. Yeah, and even this kind of like moral judgment of like absolute right and wrong. In some ways, I used to believe like, oh, there was an absolute good way to produce art, and I'm not there yet, so I need to wait till I get there. But
Right.
I think even that masquerades as ego.
Hmm. When you think about, we talk a lot about ego in the group, and I had a breakthrough this maybe 2 years ago now from one of our members, Dr. Kelly Flanagan. He wrote a book called Lovable, and he did this whole thing at one of our retreats about the ego castle. I got to tell you this real quick because I want to be a messenger for his model of ego And I think you'll dig it, and it will maybe tee up some parts of our conversation. But it's really easily explained. When you're in elementary school, you start to understand that you need to build a little defense, right, in your life, and so you build a castle wall. He says that the ego starts to build where your false self, what you project to the world. I think about it like a name brand clothing. When I was a kid growing up in Virginia Beach, it was Gotcha, Billabong, Quicksilver, these surf clothes. And when I wore them, I felt cool. I was accepted then. In junior high, people get a little more aggressive. They learn that the best defense is a good offense, and they start to attack. And he says, you start to build cannons on your wall. And that's your ego protecting yourself by attacking people. And then in high school, you start to develop your throne. And your throne is your throne of righteousness. Like you get to sit on this throne because you're good at something. You're in sports, you're academic, you're a goth, whatever tribe you find yourself in, you're a skater, you're great, and you can be right and the world can be wrong. And he said, at some point in your life, hopefully you realize that your castle can have a drawbridge and you can walk out and be yourself in the world. And I thought that was just a beautiful articulation of how our ego is formed. And his point is, you don't get rid of your ego castle. It's there. You just decide how you're going to use it. And it's never going to go away. That's been big for me.
I think the ability, first of all, I got to say, what about Town and Country Surf? TNC.
Oh, right.
Okay, that was a big one with the gorilla and the lizard, because it was a Nintendo game too.
Yeah.
But I do think for me, a lot of what empowerment and power, I totally agree with that analogy, and the ability to be able to walk away from it, whatever it is, whether it's a boss or a way of cultural living, or even whatever this identity that I've developed in myself. It can be great and cool. I'm fine with the castle, but if you are always stuck inside of it, defending it,
exactly,
I feel like that's when its limitations really shine. So to be able to step outside of it, like you said, the drawbridge, and look back at it.
I think about stepping outside of the castle. I mean, dude, that's what you've done in so many different ways, learning about your life, all the original ideas. I think of you as just this incredible creator, and I'm just getting to know your life. But I'm fascinated by it, and I really am. And that's not meant to blow smoke. It's like genuinely how I feel learning about your life right now, Ben. Like I'm like, I gotta be friends with Ben. he's gonna be an expander for me. He's gonna help me to think differently about life. One thing I could comment about 12 things that I read about your life and have seen online. One that was interesting was 7 years ago, you were awarded Entrepreneur of the Year for Cincinnati by Ernst & Young. You came home, the picture online is of you in a tux, and you're like, I threw the award in the trash and I've never worn the tux ever since. Right?
Yeah.
Hey, how
the hell did you find that?
So tell me about that a little bit. And I want to know about it from two sides. One, your take on awards, or, what that meant to you in that moment. Just expand on that a little bit. But I'm also really interested in like your kids and awards, because I think that trophy conversation's one that always comes up. Like, should every kid deserve a trophy? And that, so just from two sides, like, what do you think about those awards that you get, what they mean to you, and how you're dealing with awards with your kids?
Yeah, man. Love that. Okay. Well, first of all, I'll address the tux. That's the easy one. That was rented. So,
all right, good.
But I haven't worn a tux ever since either way.
Yeah.
In terms of the trophy itself, man, that's really interesting, an observation for you, because I did win this award and I was happy for it. I didn't want to like shit on the organization or whatever. But I think at the same time, coming home and putting it in the trash was what I've learned about acclaim and awards and prestige, is that shit's a heavy burden to bear. And if you are going to define yourself by it, or build your castle walls bigger, it becomes harder to walk outside of them. An entrepreneur, making money, business, that's one thing that I do and have done. But I'm less obsessed with what have I done in the past, in terms of like, because one of the things you said about me was, I forget whether you used the word creative or imaginative or something. You said something a few minutes back. But I actually think everyone is that way. I think naturally we will come up with new ideas. Like, humans are really just that way. Like, we've been doing it for thousands of years, maybe millions of years. And I'm trying to detach myself from the things in my past that are keeping me from my next stage of imagination. And staring at some damn award for the next 2 years of something that I was, no matter how awesome it is just not, I don't want to get fixated on the past. And I think it was my own way of ensuring my free space imaginatively for the future. Is that a word? So, and awards are the trickiest because those are other people saying that you're awesome, but I don't want other people to define me one way or the other. I don't care if it's positive or negative.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Awards, we tend to build these entire shelves and we stack all our awards, but I don't think what people realize maybe is it's a double-edged sword. And when you start to write a best-selling book in a certain category, and then you start bragging about that category, it almost feels like the next book you write needs to be in that category. But I don't know what category my next book's going to be in. It probably won't be the last one because for me, growth is about being open to what's next. And very rarely is what's next tied to what has happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of the kids and trophy, you want me to address that?
Yeah, please.
I think there's two levels of questions. You asked the question, it was an interesting way of phrasing it. Do our kids deserve a trophy? I'm fine with saying that. I think on some level, it's nice to look at our kids and be like, hey, kid, you're awesome. You're beautiful. You're talented. But I also, on some level, very quickly want to move to a point where I can also teach my kid, hey, your life is not dependent upon that compliment or any external person's opinion, including my own, which is a really tough thing to separate as a dad.
Yeah.
That's a little dance right there. And I don't have it figured out, but I do have kind of like a goal in mind of that in the back of my mind.
What is that?
Well, I mean, I kind of just laid it out a little bit, but it's like early on, I think there's this way of looking at life where the talk on ego that I've heard all says it's important. You can't abolish it.
Correct.
Like you have to reinforce it early on and say, hey, this castle, it's actually there. Like you build the walls, you show the walls, you're like, hey, these are important. Like your personal space, your identity, those are important. But then at some point later on in life, as early as possible, I would say, to be able to teach kids and ourselves as adults to operate outside of it and to move beyond it. So I would just say the goal is in the back of my mind, even when I'm giving my kids praise, in other words, giving them mini trophies.
Yeah.
To insert just this idea that there's life beyond that. That the most important thing for you is not to earn my praise as an adult. I'll give it, but also there's more to life than that.
Yep. Makes sense. All right. So let's keep shifting here a little bit. Cause again, like I said earlier, man, there's a lot of ground to cover. I want to talk about your family. And so let's back up for a minute and I want to put the timeline together. Did you grow up in a big family?
No, one brother, one sister. So 3 of us.
And you have 6 kids.
6 kids. Yeah.
Did you set out to have a big family? Was that something you knew early on?
I had an idea. We lived in Seattle at the time, and having more than 2 was like crazy at this time, especially at the age we were having them. Yeah. So we kind of got a lot of flack even early on. And I would say, no, we never were like, oh, we're going to have a large family. But at the same time, the reasons why people had small families never quite made sense to us. They're like, oh, well, you don't have enough money, or you need to focus on college. And I was like, none of those made sense. So it just kind of happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have, so you have means now to do things to, reading this post earlier, like you've created some success, but dude, that's been quite the journey. When earlier I was mentioning this post about how, and I'm just going to read one line out of it. You said, you spent $700 at Costco this week on organic shit and Christmas decorations that don't make any sense. But I was just as thankful the year that we ate out of Trader Joe's dumpster and brought home wilted flowers.
Dude, that was a fucking year.
I mean, that's quite the contrast. Can you, I need to know a little bit more about that, because I mean, even like you're thankful to own numerous homes on one block, but I was also thankful the year that the 3 of us were in a 1-bedroom apartment with another person living on our porch. And why I'm particularly fascinated by this is that while some of our guys in the group it's been a long time since they've financially struggled. I do know for a fact that there are young entrepreneurs, people that are making shifts in their business, people that got hit this year bad with COVID, that finances are an issue for them. Some people it's not, some people it is. But when I left a job years and years ago to become a speaker and run our charity, dude, I spent all my money year one, and year two, I went into debt. They were foreclosing on 2 homes of mine. I didn't know how I was going to do it. And it's not a pissing contest to see who is most poor, but the idea of transformation and evolution, what you created. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and like what time frame of your life that happened in? I'm trying to put it together of like, where did you come from? Where are you now? What was that evolution like? And when was that happening? Did you have kids?
Yeah. So, well, I've been married for 20 years and we were pregnant like year one. Okay.
Yeah.
So my oldest is 20. So I've kind of, for the last 2 decades, have always had kids. And in that first or second year, I was waiting tables at Red Robin, which I thought was a major upgrade because I was indoors and getting tips, but I was still minimum wage. And my wife is in school, so we were on government assistance, like basically welfare, getting free peanut butter and stuff like that, which once again, I thought was amazing. And it was in that year that we quit. I quit my job to bike across the country with my wife and 1-year-old because we had $2,000 or $3,000. And I just had this like feeling deep down, if we don't kind of like stick it to the man or prioritize our life now, we're never going to be able to do it later. And that's one of the things I've learned is if you're waiting for a dollar amount for anything, to be happy, to start making your own art, to start living with integrity, to take yourself seriously, to start prioritizing family. If you're not doing it now, you're not going to do it then. I don't care what time increment we're talking about or what dollar amount. So that's just been a huge staple for us is if you care about something, schedule it into your damn week now. Don't wait. And that's been a hard one process because I think my journey was going from this like welfare living, which by the way, I loved because for spiritual reasons, we were planning on being missionaries like overseas. So I was preparing then, I had this motivation like, oh, we're going to be living in the dirt in Africa. So I was like getting ready for that. Everything we were doing, I was like getting ready for that. Well, I remember like fast forward 10 years. So I had this little thing, which I do not think we want to get into, but I ran this blackjack team, which is where I got most of my financial education was in being a professional gambler for 10 years. But then I went on.
The story just gets better and better.
Well, that's just like one of those tangents that, I mean, it's true, but it's a whole nother thing.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So I went from that to doing internet startup world. And that was where I started making, like my first years of making more than $1 million a year were in this internet startup world. And I just remember thinking everything that I thought was going to happen didn't happen. I didn't have more freedom. I didn't have less stress. I didn't have more time.
Right.
My life was I was fatter than I'd ever been. I was more stressed out than I'd ever been. And that was kind of the moment when I was like, oh, this trajectory. And the people I was hanging out with at this time, like I was a part of this entrepreneurs organization with all these like, rich, successful people. And they had, they were making $1 million, $5 million a year, but they were buying $10, $20 million homes. So they were under more stress. So I saw everyone was leveraged to hell. Like, we were leveraged on our time, our stress, our energy, our family commitments, et cetera. And everyone is living for the future. And that's when I decided, we did this hard stop. We did a reset. I paid off all my debt, canceled all my insurance policies. We took a year off. We just quit school and everything. And we started reimagining what we wanted instead of trying to catch up with what we thought was success.
Yeah.
And that really changed our life. We started, it just changed so much, academically, financially, but we started to say, if we're not happy now, we're not going to be happy then. Cause I thought once I was a millionaire, as a kid, I remember hearing which is a weird name to say now, but Donald Trump, when I remember hearing about him in like first grade that he was like a millionaire. And I was just like, that's so crazy. Like I didn't even know what that meant. Like,
Yeah.
but I was like,
It's a
millionaires must be
lot.
happy,
Yeah.
you know? And then when I became a millionaire, I remember the day my bank account crossed and I was like, this feels like just like the day before.
Right.
So I started investing energy into figuring out how can we be happy now?
Yeah.
No matter whether we're, and that was the point of that post you read was like, I mean, in a giant graphic, it just said now,
Mhm.
which is like, can we be happy living out of a dumpster? If you
Yep.
can't, I don't think you're going to be happy when you can order food delivered to your door. I mean, because now we have like Uber Eats. I could literally have 10 different companies deliver food to my door. Like in history, that's never been done, and yet people are more pissy than ever. Anyways, you're getting me ranting, but
How do you keep it? How do you keep it? I want to get to the hike here in a second. I knew this was we were gonna take a lot of detours, but how do you create an environment? Not even sure how I want to ask this question, but I know what I want to get to is how do you create an environment with your family that balances that appreciation of, the moments where you don't have it all and those that you do, and I'll give you an example. Does that make sense, or do you need me to expand and unpack that a little bit more?
no, I think I do understand that. But I guess I'm asking, are you talking about appreciation for the kids? How do you get them to appreciate it?
Yeah, exactly. And specifically as it relates to money and growing up with money, right? And all this opportunity.
Well, I think kids leech off of parents in their mindsets. So no matter what you do, based upon whatever you believe, I think the kids will more than likely adopt. If there is, nurture versus nature, if there is like a nurture thing, it will come from who you are and what you believe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, like it's the weirdest thing. Like parents are obsessed with their kids being ungrateful brats, but if we're going to be honest, deep down, the reason why they're that way is because as adults, we're bigger, ungrateful brats.
Yeah.
Like I said, we have fucking Uber Eats, we have this and that, and we're all bitching about our lives still,
Yeah.
making more money than we've ever made in our entire life or in human history.
Yeah.
So it's like, at what point, so as an adult, I guess, the book, one of the values of it is it shows this setting of hiking and camping and prehistoric living. It's like at least the closest we could come to, which for me as a human was one of the resources that helped me as a young man when I developed or like started learning about mountaineering and camping, which were like new things for me, like even biking along the coast and hitchhiking and things like that. Those were valuable things for me, like living in a tent when I was like, oh, some of these most basic things, these basic human connections, these basic feelings of success, like pitching a tent behind Burger King and not getting caught and surviving the night, was just as satisfying to me as buying $1 million home. And if I can't learn to appreciate those things, my kids never will.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter what I say. If I'm like, you spoiled brats should be off your iPad when I was a kid, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So part of, our parenting experience has just been for me as a dad to pursue and appreciate those simple environments myself and let my kids watch it. I don't feel like I need to teach them anything.
Yeah.
If they see the smile on my face when I light a fire and cook food on it, or invite them along and like hike through a blizzard, and then the joy that we feel when we get a shower, afterwards, that no amount of teaching can measure up to them watching me enjoying those things and enjoying those things themselves.
Yeah. I realized fairly early on, thanks to a couple of friends of mine who are, they're Jewish, was living in the Northeast. They're Orthodox, and they follow that, they're as strict as I knew at the time. And they were talking about the things that they would abstain from, that they would eliminate from their life over the course of a month, whether it be electricity or that, they wouldn't touch each other certain times of the month. This is a married couple I'm talking to. And I thought, wow, how amazing it is then when you have access to electricity and being able to touch each other. And they're like, it's incredible. And I thought, it was the first time that hit me that if you really want to learn to appreciate something, you have to create that contrast. You have to remove it from your life. So it's almost like planned abstinence from these things. And if you don't do it yourself, and nature's not giving you that opportunity to remove yourself from that, that's the true gift. My wife always says the sixth love language is distance. It's space, right? Like it's like she loves me more when she doesn't see me. And so we've realized that as many times as we need to be able to get closer together, we need to be able to be distanced from each other as well, as part of our marriage. And when I think about what you did with the hike, just removing somebody from removing your entire family from the pattern. I mean, it's a giant pattern interrupt. I learned that from Tony Robbins as a young entrepreneur, right? Like, it's like, what is a pattern interrupt? How does it work in your life? And what you guys did is a giant pattern interrupt. So let's get into the hike, man. I'm pumped about this. 2,000 miles together. Your book is out, came out the 17th of November, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So happy for you. And
thank you.
Let's talk about the genesis of this hike to begin with. Like, when did you wake up and like, oh, we're going to go be the largest family to ever hike the Appalachian Trail?
Well, it didn't start off the way at all, actually. I wanted to do the hike 17 years earlier with one or two kids, because I didn't think it would be possible to do with a large family. Because I was sold the narrative, and I bought it, that once you have kids, your life is over. Get ready for things to suck for 18 years. So we had kind of given up on the hike. And it was my wife, actually, who kind of started to re-envision it, I would say 3 or 4 years ago. And being up for the challenge and just believing that, kind of the pattern interrupt, as you phrased it, is just intrinsically valuable. It kind of became one of those questions of, I think most people before the hike or hearing about the hike, they ask this question, like, how can you afford to do it? With these types of experiences under our belt, we've learned to ask the question, how can you afford not to do it?
Yeah.
What is really more important than spending 6 months with your family? And what are you going to say in 40 years? So, yeah, I think with that type of questioning, we had the money, we had the time. Like I said, we had taken that year off of school, and I know you've had an unschooler on your podcast before. So we had started to develop more of an educational philosophy that was like not dependent upon not only a public school, but not only even dependent on regular, consistent discipline and curriculum. So all the standard excuses that most people had, we didn't have. So then it just kind of became, well, our daughter was 17, or she was going to turn 17. We knew this was the last chance we had. So we even had a fire lit under our ass. It was kind of the last possible moment we could do it and be guaranteed the opportunity.
Yeah. And so what are the ages of the kids when you do this hike?
The kids were between 2 and 16 when we started.
Yeah. 2 to 16. Oh man. And how long were you out there?
We were out there for 5 months and 9 days. We averaged 13.5 miles every single day for 161 straight days. And that's with, I think, 13 days off. Yeah. So that means realistically, we're doing, the days we're hiking, we're doing closer to 15 miles a day. The before and the after pictures are just crazy in terms of, like, we met my cousin right after the hike, and she had just gone through drug counseling in terms of like to be a counselor. And she was like, if I wouldn't had seen your teeth, I would have thought you were all meth addicts, because we were so ripped and scraggly and, just lean.
Yeah.
So our family went through a massive transformation in that 5 months.
Yeah, that's incredible. So you're, and if I'm trying to do some quick math on this, like, how many hours a day are you then walking? I mean, my initial gut says you're maybe walking 6 hours a day.
No, it's about, yeah, maybe in a way, but I think we're averaging like 1 to 2 miles an hour, because this is, we're carrying 30-pound packs. It's the Appalachian Trail, so it's almost always uphill or downhill. Some of the terrain is technical. So like at our peak, there was these few times when we weren't able to carry we didn't have to carry our pack, so we can get up to 3 miles an hour. But when you take it all into account, man, there's days, like a lot of July was waking up around 5 to 6 a.m. and going till about 8 p.m. at times. Not solid walking. not solid walking, but we take breaks when we can. But even the breaks, they're not exactly breaks. Like, I mean, you've done an ultra marathon, so you know what a break is like on an ultra marathon. You have to pee and poo. You have to change diapers. You have to figure out navigation. You have to get food in your body. That's like a full-time job for 5 months is eating. I lost 30 pounds in the first 5 weeks, like not even on purpose. Like I was eating whole pizzas for appetizers. So yeah, it was this entire world, shift. It felt like we had moved, like actually, in terms of like when people move to a new country or something like that, like our world got turned upside down as we were just consumed by this activity.
Aside from the physical shift, how are you mentally never the same after that?
Well, one, what's possible, and that's one of the things. It's kind of weird. My 7-year-old, she's 8 now, my daughter, she became the youngest female to ever hike the trail. But so she had completed, by the time she was 7, I think, she had completed 2 marathons and the Appalachian Trail, and she didn't know how to read yet. But I just always, I see kids around here, and our family runs a lot. So we talk to these kids and they're like, you want to come? They're like, well, I can't run 2 miles. My kids don't say that shit. They know it's possible. Now they might not want to, and I'm completely fine with that. I don't care if they hike another day in their life. Honestly, it doesn't matter to me. But at least they know that they can. And I think for me and the kids, being able to look back and just know that we can was one thing. And the other thing is it's the ultimate kind of like bullshit remover of like what is valuable in life. For 5 months, we absolutely laughed and celebrated shit like electricity and running water and fucking Wi-Fi and, and warm food and a beer or a Starbucks blew our minds, and being warm or just being around people. Having a chair was amazing at certain points. I celebrated my 39th birthday in a parking lot with 8 friends, and we didn't even have chairs, but it was like one of the best birthdays of my life. So the mindset shift of just like kind of erasing entitlement, it's a hard thing in our culture to achieve that. And I don't think it's about being a monk or saying that pleasure is bad. I actually think it's the key to discovering pleasure. So that's what I feel like as a family, we experience that together, those little moments.
Yeah, I can so appreciate that, man. Back in 2005, when we did this 52 miler to kick off the charity to raise money, I remember feeling like I had been expanded of what's possible. That was the biggest thing, was like, holy shit, if I could do that, where else am I selling myself short in life? Like, what else can I possibly do?
It's a contagious mindset. And it's weird, even with grown ass men, it's weird. You like look outside and it's raining and you're like, I can't get wet.
Right.
I mean, just that mindset. It's so funny. You're like, I know I'm waterproof. I know I'll dry off.
Yeah.
But there's something that's like, I don't know whether it's lizard brain or what it is, where it's just like, don't go out there. Bad things are going to happen. And then you have that with snow and sleeping outside and being caught and, walking. I remember even my shoes getting wet. It was a simple thing. I had this thing on my mind, don't get your shoes wet. Like, and you don't realize how much that one limitation, how many limitations it creates across your entire life.
Yeah.
But then when you blow that one limitation out, you do start to wonder like, oh shit.
Were you guys up on a time frame? Like, why not just slow down and just enjoy more, play more? Why walk so much or move so much each day?
Yeah, we really were under a self-imposed time frame where early on the kids kind of adopted this goal to make it to this camp that we were raised at. So we adopted this really impossible kind of goal, which was a real curse in a lot of ways. Like other people were taking days off in towns and enjoying the rivers, and we were just trudging. But like in Maine and New Hampshire, we saw these people also, like it was raining And they would say, well, I'm not under a time frame, so I'm going to stay inside this day that it rains. And we were getting like 40, 50 miles ahead of people as we would go out 3-4 days in a row and just get the miles in. And we started to see that it wasn't just a curse, that because of our deadline, I mean, like when you don't have a deadline, even as an artist,
Sure.
shit. I mean, this shit might never, ever, ever, ever get done, even though you really want it to.
Yeah.
And to me, even having that deadline kind of kept us honest in a way, or provided motivation that I don't know if we would have had otherwise. So there was a pro and con to it.
Where was your biggest failure as a dad, at least in your opinion? Like, where was your lowest moment during the adventure?
So I write about this in the book, but there was a couple moments both with my sons, actually, which I don't think is coincidental. I think part of my psychology and growth and understanding as a dad is seeing that the areas that I reject or am unable to accept in my kids are probably the areas that I am unable to accept in myself. And I identify more with my male children than I do my female children. So I'm like harsher on them. Like when they cry, I'm like, don't cry. You shouldn't have feelings right now. And that's really, I think, an extension of me feeling like I'm not entitled to feelings at certain points in my life. And there is these, kind of moments where it was just like this all is lost moment where my 2-year-old and actually my 15-year-old at the time just kind of like lost it. And in turn, I lost it with them. And, talk about, to bring it full circle with ego and having the drawbridge and not being able to leave the castle, I became obsessed with this goal of finishing the damn hike. I don't know if you ever read Into Thin Air by John Krakauer. It's one of the books I was obsessed with in my
totally
years. But you hear this thing called summit fever. They have this turnaround time. Like you're hiking to the summit, but if you don't turn around by 4 p.m., like you're going to die. And everyone agrees. Like they're all like, yeah, totally. Yep, absolutely. Like life is important. Like makes sense, right? Then you get there and you see the summit and it's 4 p.m. And the summit is, it looks like it's touchable, but it's really still a quarter mile away and 400 vertical feet. And you're like, I'll give myself another 10 minutes, another 45 minutes. And I feel like that summit fever on our own hike, we're in 4.5 months. And now what we didn't even know is possible, now we can see like, oh, that's possible. I can start to feel and taste the success. So my life becomes dispensable, but also my kids' life almost became dispensable to that goal. And that's a reality that's really hard to admit, that it's easy to put our kids, their needs aside and disregard them completely for some fucking, at the end of the day, who's going to give a shit that I hiked the Appalachian Trail in 40 years? I hardly care about it now, honestly. So in 38 more years, I'm not going to care as much as I am like the relationships I'm building with my children and teaching them that their feelings are important. So those were and I knew we were going to get into that a little bit, but I didn't know I was going to be pushed that far and that hard as a human and as a dad.
That happens with guys in their businesses all the time, where they just get so obsessed with the goal, whatever it is. And they're just like, I see it as, and I talk about it as seasons. Like it's always one more season with an entrepreneur. It's like, I got to launch the book. I got to get the movie out. I got to get I got to get this thing I just hired a new person. I got to get them set. Like but
that's socially acceptable. Like if you're disregarding your kids for business, you could even say it's for their own good. You're like, oh, well, I'm doing this for you, kid.
Passion. I'm going to teach them how to work hard. Yeah,
totally. It's totally an ego thing though. I agree. But then when you're hiking, there's just no excuse. It's like, it's viewed as completely optional. So then when you're abusive and disregarding your kids' needs, everyone views you as a total villain. Even though I totally agree. I think it's the same thing.
Yeah.
As setting a business goal that's completely fucking arbitrary. Like if you have cable and if you have Netflix, you're in the top 0.01% of history.
Yeah.
So you don't need to be working.
Exactly. Yeah. That's been my experience. That's why Front Row Dad started was, I'm making more money than I ever have as a keynote speaker. And yet it was like, I couldn't say no. It was like, you made $5,000 a speech, then you make 10 grand a speech, then you make 20 grand a speech, then someone's going to pay you 30 grand a speech. And you're like, but I've
Totally.
spent 8 years getting to this point. How could I say no?
And you say you're doing it for your kids. At
And
least
yeah, doing it for the
oh
family.
yeah, this is like gonna make you, as if my kids need more money. You know, they don't care.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think like, well, I don't know. I feel like at the end of our lives, the things that we want is time with the people that we cared about, not more shiny.
How do you, somebody gets that intellectually and then they just don't get it emotionally, including myself. So this is not me picking on other people. But how do we hold that in our intention? How do we hold that? How do we bring that into reality and not just give that lip service? Like, how do you hold yourself accountable? How do you keep on track, Ben, with these principles that you have? And do you ever feel like you get derailed? Do you ever get sucked back into that? I mean, you just talked about one of them.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is just a key for me with all of life, is accepting that reality. I think it's important to just acknowledge it and to say, hey, yeah, we're humans and we prioritize prestige and ego and goals. And that's okay. Like, let's not villainize it. Let's not moralize it. Let's normalize the conversation, which is, I know what you're doing in your groups and with what, you know, everything that you got going on with Front Row Dads is just normalizing those types of conversations, which I love that. So to just normalize the conversation and then say, what are the pros and cons of pushing our kids' needs aside for really these kind of temporary prestigious trophies? And what are the pros and cons of moving beyond that? And how do we do that? So I don't know. I'm not against it, really. Like, I think everyone does it. As parents, we all do it. We all have our, you know, it's like growing up in a religious world, it was like going to church on Sunday. Kids would be crying and parents would be smashing their kids' hair into certain ways and smashing them into outfits and smashing the kids in the minivan so that we could all show up at church on Sunday morning and look like we had our shit together. Okay, that's one version of it. But there's a lot of versions. The other versions is business. You know, we neglect our kids to do the thing that we think is so damn important. And then our family just did it in a weird way with hiking. So it's like
yeah. Who inspires you, man? When you look around, you see other dads, like who do you draw inspiration from? Who's a good role model for you? Who can we give props to?
That's tough. I feel like I have all sorts of role models that aren't supposed to be role models or something. I like Dan Bilzerian for sticking his life out there for the world to see and just be honest. I love Gary Vee for his, you know, just the way he's a business guy and just says it straight. I like Ram Dass, who's more of a, you know, hippie guru who's more about accepting and letting go and embracing ego. You know, I kind of have a long list that's always changing, actually, as I've changed. You know, my list used to be highly spiritual and religious people that were more about how to understand and follow the code that was presented in my particular religion. But as I've evolved, I'm less interested in what people say they actually believe and more interested in how they're executing. Because I draw inspiration from people that are doing shit.
Yeah.
Doing the type of shit that I want to do, whether it's writing or living or disregarding public opinion, which is an actual thing. I mean, it's a hard thing to do.
What did religion look like for you in the past, and what religion was it that you were immersed in, and what does your spiritual walk look like now?
The religion that I was raised in was, I would consider it, I guess, basically traditional Christianity. And it had a lot of overlap with how I experienced entrepreneurialism and money, in that there was all these layers to it and I was never happy with any particular one. You know, so I went to Bible college and there I learned, okay, like the serious Christians become pastors. And then it was like, Well, when you become a pastor, you're like, actually, the serious Christians are the missionaries. Like the pastors, they're like the Navy SEAL of Christians. And like the pastors are like the kind of pansies that are too lazy to go overseas. So there's like all these layers. And then once you're a missionary, you have to brag about, it's like the opposite of rich people. Christians brag about how poor they are, but it's still this sliding scale where it's never enough. When you make a lot of money, you, $1 million more dollars is not enough, or 10 more gigs or 2 more speaking gigs. And on the flip side, Christians, it's always how little you have, but it's still never enough. So I feel like more of my spirituality now, I just realized how similar the Christian life I was living was to the materialists that we were hating against and preaching against. It was like the same mindset. So now my spirituality is more obsessed with accepting reality as it stands, enjoying and being able to appreciate it now, letting it go. That's, I don't know. That's what I'm really obsessed with understanding now.
Yeah. It's a loose tie-in, but I'm trying to find a way to bridge this, and I think I just found it. It's like I was as I was doing my research on you, I found the comment about like thoughts and prayers. You have you have a trash can that says thoughts and prayers?
I do. It's in the next room. If I would have known, I could have
along the lines of spirituality. Yeah, can unpack that for a second, because I think it's great.
Yeah. Well, so Richard Rohr is I guess he's been an influence to me in helping to exit the type of rigid spirituality that I was raised with. And basically, he introduces this like kind of 3-tier system of growth and development, which is, I'm trying to think about, number 1, you have the structure and the order. Number 2, you deconstruct the order. And number 3, you rebuild the order kind of in a way that suits you and helps you. And he says that's like actually really important. Like as a kid, just one example, as a kid, you have 2 categories of people. There's good guys and there's bad guys. And I always struggled with this because I was always like, well, the Joker's not 100% bad and Batman is not 100% good. So what do I tell my kids? But it's okay to just be like, nope, that's a bad guy. That's a good guy. Like at a certain age. And then at one point you kind of want to deconstruct that and be like, well, actually, is Batman really good? Like all the time? Why does he do what he does? Maybe like him not having parents had, had a big influence on his life and he's really filling this giant void, etc. But then at some point, like rebuilding that. So, with my own life, I can see that there was all these religious things that I held that basically gave me peace of mind, and one of those things is when Christians say thoughts and prayers, or like, we have all these phrases that they use that basically it sounds loving and nice, but at the end of the day, I can see it's almost like self-soothing. It's like sucking your thumb. You're like saying these things to make yourself feel better. And I'm like, I'm not against that. But at some point, if we're just dependent upon these tools, thought patterns, phrases, ways of thinking, and they're really just for us, I think it's pretty nice to acknowledge that. And then at some point, move the fuck on and say, is this really helping me or the world or the people around me? Or am I just using these religious thought patterns as a way to feel better about myself? And not that it needs to be one or the other. I don't think anyone, including myself, is 100% free, or like, I don't mind using thought patterns, but, and there's another author that was really influential for me. And he said something like, the religious belief system is not as important as the reasons we turn to it. So, for me, I think my version of Christianity gave me comfort. It's like, oh, you're a good person. You're going to go to heaven someday. It gave me this ability to kind of like morally judge the people around me and feel good, like basically build my ego, which is weird that religion is used primarily by a lot of people, I think, including myself, to build their ego. But I started to more challenge why I feel the need to believe those things and say these things and identify a certain way.
Yeah. It's awesome. It really got me thinking about my comments that I make oftentimes, where mine is sending love. right? And it's like, there is that moment when I'm like, oh, what do I do? Well, I send love. And now it's like, okay, now that I made the comment, I feel good. And in some ways, I can justify that by saying, hey, a comment is better than no comment, to know that they're loved. And on the other hand, it is absolutely an excuse for me not to do anything else, or to take a real action, or to really show up for that person, because it's like, well, I said sending love, so back to the party, you know, where there could be a personal challenge to say, come on, no, like, what are you going to do to really serve that person? I interviewed a woman a while ago when I had a podcast called The Front Row Factor. It was mainly tied to the charity Front Row Foundation. And her book, I think it was called Alongside. And she talked about, how do you help people in need? Right. And one of them, she was kind of the do's and don'ts of helping people in need. And I remember there's definitely some parallels there behind, you know, the sending love, thoughts and prayers, and then like going and cutting your neighbor's lawn, baking food, you know, cooking food and delivering it to their front door. And even the idea of asking people like, hey, what do you need? It really puts the burden on them to make the request, where you could just be like, no, just do something for them. Just, you know, drop the cash in the Venmo, or whatever it is, where they don't have to be burdened by them figuring out how to get you to be helpful. Right?
Totally. Well, I love your question or your approach to that, because even just being willing to challenge that and ask those questions, and be able to identify that a lot of those things, like you said, we say them for ourselves. You know, there's a book called Toxic Charity, and it just highlights how a lot of the charity that we give actually is destructive to the people we give it to. It doesn't help them. Right. It actually hurts them. But as a society, we do this and participate in these structures and activities because they make us feel better. And once again, I'm actually fine with feeling better and doing things that make us feel good. But I do think, and this is what I learned from religion, that to be honest about that, and this is, so as a dad, you know, for your dad podcast, I think I want to maybe draw this out a little bit. One of the most destructive things I saw in religion that I carried over to fatherhood is this like perpetual bullshit commenting of saying, I love you. Mm-hmm. Saying I love you can be a complete form of gaslighting if it discounts the way a child is receiving it. And we say it all the time, like quote unquote good dads. We say, like, the kid's crying, we're like, well, I love you. Instead of asking a question, which is, why are you hurting? What are you feeling? And you have a much smaller world and personhood. But as a dad, I think true courage and stepping out of ego is saying, like, I want to highlight you and your ego and your identity and your experience right now, instead of declaring upon you, oh, I love you, which is another way of saying whatever you're feeling isn't real or shouldn't matter. Like, if you feel betrayed, if you feel neglected as a child. So, and religion did that so well in the way that we, you know, someone would feel judged, rightfully so, because they weren't allowed in the fucking church or whatever. And then they would leave and we'd be like, well, we love you. And it was like we weren't listening. We were using that phrase to basically discount other people and their personhood. So as a dad, I see no greater role to stop saying that. I mean, I don't want to, it's not a bad word. Like, don't cut it out completely, but the times when you want to say it, when you feel the need, also stop and listen. And, you know, your equivalent of mowing the lawn, instead of telling your neighbor, I love you, and not mowing the lawn with your kid, instead of saying, I love you, show love, which might not be saying anything. It might be saying, tell me about your feelings right now.
So fucking important. Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about lately the how we avoid listening. Like, listening has been a big theme of me for me this year, and largely because listening to myself, listening to other people, because what I saw in the world was a bunch of people that wanted to label, right? And instead of listen, right? Like, it's too quick to say, that's what that means. This is what the news means. This is what that candidate means. This is what COVID means. This is what, and it's just so quick to label and not to listen. Right. And to miss that opportunity to remain curious. To me, my own personal value with that is that's where I experience personally the most joy, the most love, the most growth as a human. Not when I think that although I crave defining things. This was also a year of defining things. Like, What do I think? What do I feel? What's fatherhood mean to me? What is a great marriage, right? What is front row dads? What are our values? All these things. But it's so easy to get caught up in righteousness. And I just love that you brought up this idea, that to me speaks to how we numb, how we medicate. And I've noticed we do this in a lot of different ways. I mean, running that ultra was a form of me medicating. Well, if I can just focus on that, I don't have to feel this. Drinking for me had been in my life if I drink, I can celebrate, and I can be with my friends, and and I don't have to feel this thing. But I noticed that I use lots of things not to feel. Like I use meditation in some ways not to feel. You can meditate and be righteousness in your meditation, right? If you're, if it's all in how the tool is being used. Anyway, I just think
I absolutely love that. And I think just to surround yourself with people that are willing to engage in that conversation. I mean, I totally agree that the labeling thing is often, it's a shortcut and we all need it and it's valuable. It has its role.
Yeah.
But also it can become larger than life and it can prevent us from growth in the future.
Yeah.
So
I like how you keep coming back to that, Ben. Like one of the things I'm noticing about you is this opportunity to say, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like I pick, that's several times now throughout the chat. And I love that about you.
Well, the other way is to kind of like villainize it, and to say like, oh, that's terrible when we do that. But I don't know if there's any ever realistically moving beyond it.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's just not the goal. So I love being able, that's for me, like embracing reality as it is and to embrace our kids how they are right now, not need them to be a certain thing for me. Like they don't need to read or write, or they don't need to be able to hike or finish a marathon or grow up to be successful or be straight or gay or whatever for me to love them and accept them.
Yeah.
But if you can't accept your kids now, why would you be able to accept them then? So that's, I feel like, that the kids are a miniature little curriculum to accept ourselves, I think. And if you can't accept yourself, you're not going to be able to accept your kid because your kids, I mean, quite literally are extensions of your own DNA.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know where I read this or where I saw this, but I thought it was really wonderful. And I was hoping you could expand on it a little bit. This has to do with the full potential of the human family. Yeah, I read that you wrote that somewhere, to experience the full potential of the human family. So how are you doing that right now? And perhaps, you'd say, hey, this whole podcast has been that. But I want to give you space to talk about either what that's been for you or what that could be for you into the future, how you experience the full potential of your human family. Or maybe "the" is actually the key word there.
Yeah. Well, we have like a YouTube channel, and I guess an Instagram account, but it's all called Fight for Together. That's kind of the phrase that we use. And that phrase, which is not grammatically correct, I think it's supposed to be fight for togetherness or something, but it's an extension of, I think, a very personal goal that I have, which is to explore the potential of relationships in terms of enlightenment and education and growth of ourselves, which I think it comes from a lot of my boredom with exploring what I would consider lesser goals. Not that I don't think that's really a fair way to say it, but I did the money thing. Like I said, I became a millionaire and I got there and I was like, oh, this game. I mean, I know it's challenging for some people, but for other people, it's easy. And when you see it as really just a game, like you're a millionaire and you're like, you're not a better person than before. And you're not actually smarter, like you could be a millionaire for a million different reasons. And then there's like a fame side of things where you get a certain amount of prestige or fame. And it's like, okay, that's a game too. And I feel like those games got really boring to me. And that's like 90% of the world is caught up in either some sort of money or fame game, whether it's with Hollywood or Instagram. And I feel like more of my goal comes in believing that these relationships, they're very primal. Family relationship, you have a man and a woman have some sort of sex and out comes a baby. It's like the most basic, oldest, simplest thing. It's kind of like fire and rocks and wood and water and shit. has something, there's a depth there of what it has to teach us that will never get old, and that I could spend the rest of my life trying to understand. So to not get fascinated by the shiny object, and to use these relationships with my kids and my partner or friends as ways of exploring, I don't know, and growing, and just kind of, I don't know. I think people need to go on their own little journey. So if you really feel like you need to make your business successful, and that's where, you know, what you need to do right now, I would say do it. But at the back of your mind, no, it's probably just a game. Like, you know, I mean, I experience this like on the racquetball court. I play racquetball 3 days a week. When I'm on the court, it's like my job to try and like murder these guys at the game of racquetball, and to tell them that they're like, they suck. I'm better. The game is so damn important, and like nothing else matters. And in like, in a way, it's kind of true, but it's really not. You step off the racquetball court, you're like, that game doesn't fucking matter. We're not going to remember it in a week. No one cares. Like, and there's this kind of like dance, but for some reason, some games we take more seriously. Money, we're like, fuck, that matters. Like, you know, you got to be responsible and bring in the dough as a dad. But it's like, it's just a game. But something about these relationships, it feels more than a game to me. So we develop, or we spend a lot of resources and energy and time investing in them, because I think they've been the most formative in my own life.
Yeah, it was one of.
And I think a lot of people treat them as I think a lot of people treat it as a side gig. You know, they're like, oh, school and job, that's the real thing. And I think I've lived enough life to be like, that's not where it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a moment of clarity for our entire brotherhood this year when we came up with, well, what is the pathway to being a front row dad? Like, what does that really look like? And this is all part of what I talked about earlier about defining things. And what it was our main priority as a brotherhood is to build relationships. Became the filter. Like, if this doesn't connect men together, then we're not doing it. That's it. It's to connect men together, right? It's to create conversation. I believe that we'll save the world, will improve family life, will improve the quality of this human experience by furthering our conversation, our ability to listen, right? But that starts with a relationship. It starts with being in connection with people. Then comes the resources. And the resources typically are the people. They are the ideas, the experiences, the stories in which they share that become the resources in which we then create a result that we're happy with, or we're fulfilled with, or we're proud of, or whatever word you want to put in there. But that relationships, resources, and results was huge for us. And we actually stopped doing a lot of shit because it was like, no, that more content doesn't matter at all without the relationship being there. Just like the content could be the capital or the money or all these things, unless it's rooted in relationship, then I think it can become very toxic. Then I think it goes off the rails, and it creates more damage than it does good. But when in relationship, when people are operating and honoring their values together collectively, boy, but it doesn't nature just tell us that? Like what you just said, the most primal piece of it is two people come together, have sex, and a baby pops out. Like the actual ability to create and make progress in the world and to evolve the species happens when people are in relation to one another. It is right there, rooted in nature. That's it.
Yeah, no, it's so basic. And this is where, I mean, I know your platform has a strong emphasis on how to deal with popular opinion, you know, and that's where I think the biggest way I went through this process, because I kept on peeling layers back from the onion. I mean, like I said, in my own entrepreneurial world, I realized this when I got more money and fame and prestige than I ever thought I would, because like I said, my goal was to be a missionary. So I was against money. And then when but I was against it thinking, well, maybe if I got it, I'd be happy. I just shouldn't be happy. But then when I got it and I actually wasn't happy, it sent me on this journey. And that it started really with our kids, where I was like, okay, school is really important. And we were homeschooling at this time. So we're like, we need to invest energy into being the best schooling that we can. So we're like making our kids cry to force them to learn math. And just like, I mean, there's tears and there's heartache and there's thousands of dollars being dropped on curriculum, and we're hacking this and hacking that, and teaching them fucking Latin and all this shit. And at some point you have to ask, wait, why are we doing this? And it's like, oh, it's to get a job. And it's like, well, why does a job matter? And at some point it always comes back to relationship. School is for relationship. So here I am making my kid cry to learn math, ruining the relationship for relationship. Right. And that's where all these lesser goals kind of take over: the money, the acceptance, the prestige with friends and family, so I can pat myself on the back and get the ego hit and be like, oh, my kid knows Latin in 4th grade or whatever the fuck. It's like, so just that centering of saying that. And I think it sounds controversial. Like, learning is for relationship with yourself, relationship with those around you. If the learning is not facilitating that, it's probably not even real learning anyways. It's probably just functioning as a distraction. Same thing with money. So I agree that relationships are the most important. But
dude, this has been amazing. Enjoyed our chat tremendously, Ben. Hope that we find a way to build our friendship moving forward. Hope I find a way to be more and more valuable to you and to your family. I'm for sure going to be following the adventure and the journey that you have been living and will continue to live. Super grateful that for this encounter and what it's brought to my life, man. Been one of my favorite conversations this year for sure for me to connect with you today. So thank you.
I love these questions and your approach, and you're coming at it from a unique angle. I mean, you asked me before we started, I think, is there something I don't want to talk about that I just get sick of talking about? And, our family did this hiking thing, which is what we're most notable for. But I'm not about hiking. It's not, hiking is just another game. It's just like racquetball, just another thing that you do. But I love the questions that you're asking and the approach that I think what you're going for. It's really fun for me to surround myself and be around people that are digging a little bit deeper. So I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thanks, man. While you've got the front row now to listening in, anything else that you wanted to say? You can ask a question, you can tell a story, you can make a statement. I mean, dude, the platform is yours to share anything you want. If there's anything that we didn't cover.
Man, that is, I guess I'll hammer this one point just because it's been one of the most influential in our life. And I think I alluded to it, but the key for us in America, we live in a very bucket list oriented society where people are going for the grand slam. We want to be a millionaire. We want to retire and live this thing someday, somehow, somewhere. And our family learned pretty early on that if we don't schedule it into our week, it doesn't really matter to us. So I know the topic of the book is this incredible bucket list activity. I mean, the Appalachian Trail is this activity that many people plan for their retirement. So in some ways, it's not an accurate representation of our family. But more important than these bucket list activities for us is our everyday life. And we've learned that if we're not willing to address our everyday week in life, and if we're not if it's not scheduled into our week, there's a good chance we really don't care about it. And to just accept that reality and to be honest with that, and to start facing life on those terms with those questions, I think is the best way forward for most people than to really spend time fantasizing about some ubiquitous thing that could happen in multiple decades from now. So I love that you have this community where you're doing that. You're forcing people to address the now and giving them resources to do that, because that's really where my passion is to be honest about what can we do this week? I mean, like, fuck 2 decades from now, like we could all be dead by then, but what can people walk away from this week with, prioritizing relationships or apologizing to a kid or listening to someone.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate you, man. This has been really cool. Can't wait for this episode to drop. I know this is going to spark some great conversation. Part of my goal is that we have these podcasts and these conversations, but really what they spark are these more intimate dialogues with our bands. We have small groups that we call bands. and they get together typically once a month, or some of them once a week, and they talk about things that we bring into the dialogue through these conversations like the one we're having now. So I'm also curious as to whether or not I'm going to be hiking the Appalachian Trail with my family at some point, because I can't wait to tell my wife about this whole adventure, and she wants to get out there, and she loves new exciting adventures, and this would certainly be one of them. So maybe I'll be calling you again to ask for the packing list.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll be calling you to ask, how do I get into public speaking? Because I think I
Done,
might have
man.
to do
Good
that
trade.
more. So
good trade. All right, brother. Hey, man, thanks so much. I wish you all the best. I'm not going to say thoughts and prayers, but I'm going to just make a commitment to keep showing up and connecting in your
all
world.
The love.
Build a relationship.
Was that your phrase?
Yeah, sending love. Sending love to you and your family.
I won't say sending love.
All right, man. Take care, brother.
Thanks.